I'm incredibly proud. My next guest is one of the great rising stars in the conservative movement. This is a guy with a great story, been everywhere, done everything, and he's taken on the establishment in Texas, taken on a multi-hundred millionaire in the lieutenant governor. My guest is Ted Cruz. Ted, are you with us?
I am. It's great to be with you, Steve.
Sir, I got to tell you, I know that Andrew Breitbart had a chance to catch up with you in CPAC, and we've for a long time wanted you on the show. I've wanted you on well before you were had the cover story in National Review. But why don't you tell people your story, your family stories, before we get to you and what you've accomplished, your family story of how you guys came to this country and what your family's done to make something of themselves. Can you share with our audience in Southern California and throughout the nation on Breitbart Live? Just tell us something about yourself, about your background, your family.
I'd be very happy to. My dad is from Cuba. He was born in Cuba, and he grew up in Cuba. And when he was a teenager, he got involved in the Cuban Revolution, and he began fighting when he was 14 years old. He ended up being thrown in prison and tortured when he was 17 and beaten almost to death. To this day, his front teeth are not his own because they were kicked out of his mouth in a Cuban jail. He fled Cuba in 1957, and he came to Texas. He arrived in Austin, didn't speak a word of English, had absolutely nothing except he had $100 that was sewn into his underwear. And he went and got a job as a dishwasher, making 50 cents an hour. And he worked 7 days a week. He paid his way through school, graduated, got a job. And he and my mother ended up starting a small business, a seismic data processing company in the oil and gas business. So I grew up in Houston as the son of two small business owners. And I'll tell you, Steve, as a kid, over and over again, my dad used to say to me, when we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? And, there's no question that better explains why it is I'm running right now for Senate, because, as you know well, our freedoms, our liberties are under assault today like never before. And Americans, millions of Americans all over the country are standing up to fight for freedom. And if we don't fight for our freedom, we will lose.
Ted, is that why you want to go for a federal office like the United States Senate? I want to get to the Medellin case in a second about American sovereignty, which instead of a natural progression, you've been, I guess, Solicitor General of the state of Texas. A natural progression would be to run eventually for lieutenant governor and then governor of Texas. But you want to, why do you want to skip that and go to the United States Senate now in your career?
Because the threat today is from Washington. Barack Obama is the most radical president this country's ever seen. And we have seen an explosion of power and spending and abuse at the federal level. And nothing is more sorely needed right now than strong, conservative, constitutional fighters in the Senate. The Senate's the battleground. And the problem, what's maddening, Steve, as you know well, is there is a screaming void of effective, principled constitutional conservatives who can stand up and take the fight to Obama. And if we don't do that now...
Well, I'm talking about even taking the fight to the establishment, because
yes.
Let's go back to your background. As a young man, you went and lectured on the Constitution before you went to Princeton. And then from Princeton, you went into Harvard Law School, and then you clerked for the Chief Justice. Give people your background, because it is incredibly, incredibly impressive. And you're grounding in the Constitution. That's something that's been in your bones since you were a young man.
Well, that's exactly right. I grew up in Houston, went to Second Baptist High School. And when I was in high school, I got very involved in a nonprofit based in Houston called the Free Enterprise Institute. And what they did is they did speech contests for high school kids. And we would study free market economics. We would read Milton Friedman and von Mises and Hayek and Bastiat. And we'd write a 20-minute memorized speech on free market economics. And then what they would do that was really transformational is they would book the kids who were city winners, and I was a city winner all 4 years of high school, to speak at Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs, and I ended up speaking all over Texas on free market economics. They then created a spin-off group that they called the Constitutional Corroborators. And it was 5 high school students. We spent hundreds of hours studying the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, and we memorized a shortened mnemonic version of the Constitution. And we toured the state giving speeches where we would start the speech.
I'd love this story. Tell it, brother. I love this.
Well, and it's a great example of the sort of civic education of the founding principles
Yes,
that make our country great that so many kids are not getting the foundation today.
absolutely.
That they don't understand the American exceptionalism that makes us, as Reagan put it, a shining city on a hill. But what we used to do is we would go speak at a big Rotary Club, and while you were sitting there having lunch, 5 high school students, we'd set up easels in the front of the room, and we would write the entire Constitution from memory in a short mnemonic form. Then we would write a definition of socialism, government ownership or control of the means of production or distribution in an economy. Under the principle, Steve, if you don't know what it is, you can't identify it when you have it. And then we would write a quote from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. And I gave in 4 years of high school probably 80 speeches all over Texas on free market economics and the Constitution. It became what I wanted to do in life, is stand and fight to preserve them, particularly being the child of an immigrant who had fled oppression. There was an urgency to it, and that urgency's never been greater than right now.